Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's WWF King of the Ring, brought to us by LJN. The fourth and final WWF game for the NES, and I think was the first one I ended up playing, as I rented it from Blockbuster as a child. It came out pretty late in the NES life, in 1993. The game features 10 wrestlers, including an 11th wrestler that is you, and that you can edit the stats for. For this run of the game, I'll be playing as the created character. I may tweak the stats a little bit throughout, but honestly, it doesn't seem like they do a whole lot. Speed does change up how quickly you move, but as far as like moves and the like, not necessarily. Our first matchup is against Lex Luger. Unfortunately, every wrestler ends up having the same set of moves, so whoever you end up picking, it's still the same move set. It's similar to what we were doing last time as far as using our kicks to help us out and then using the body slam. If you time it right with your kicks, you can get a series of them to knock your opponent down. Once you get them in a nice loop, you can keep stomping them over and over again. They may eventually get out of it with a grapple or be able to hit you as well, so you always have to be ready. But if you knock them to the ground, start doing that stomp and just keep pressing the button to hopefully go into another kick when they stand up and knock them right back to the ground. This is one of those games that my fingers get sore for sure as I'm trying to press the buttons and mash them when I get into the grapples in order to do that body slam. Once we get our opponent's health down, we can pin them, same kind of way that we did before in the last game, Steel Cage Challenge. Sometimes it can be finicky where you have to go. Usually if I go near the head and the shoulder area, it usually activates the pin. Our next opponent is going to be Shawn Michaels, HBK, the Heartbreak Kid. This was relatively early on in that kind of life for him, changing gimmicks over in 1993 to the Heartbreak Kid, getting away from the whole rockers and such. I mean, what can be said about Shawn Michaels that hasn't already been said? One of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Maybe not necessarily the greatest backstage personality, especially back in the 90s to work with, but you couldn't take anything away from him when it came to the ring, whether it was entertaining the fans with his character and on the mic, or whether it was his in-ring skill. Sometimes when you get them in that combo, they will try to run away. Sometimes when they go into the corner, I'll like to do the run into the ropes and then do a flying drop kick, which can end up hitting. Other times they'll block it, kinda, and you'll end up getting knocked down. With the kick, it's not only just doing the stomp, but when they stand back up, you kind of want to time it when they get right back up and kick them as soon as they do so that your kick goes through before whatever they're about to do. Here we hit the last move we need on Michaels, and 1, 2, 3, we're moving on to the next match. Next up is the Macho Man, Randy Savage. In 1993, Macho Man was starting to get away from the wrestling ring in WWF and was doing announcing. He was part of the announce team on Monday Night Raw throughout most of the year. He did get back in the ring a few times. There was some feuding he did, including with Crush, leading into their match at WrestleMania 10. But then he would go away from WWF to WCW and fully get back into the ring. This is by no means an easy game on the hard difficulty. Getting the timing down and being able to actually hit your slams on your opponents can be really, really difficult. The AI is kind of relentless when it comes to some of the grapples. You gotta really either butt mash or use a turbo button. Since this is the Macho Man, I'm going to go for something special to finish up the match. Get his health down pretty low. I'm going to go over, wait a second for him to get back up. I'm going to slam him down one more time and then go to the top rope to finish him off with his patented elbow drop. I did hit it, even though it looks like I didn't, considering my character is kind of on the mat as well. But get back up, go for the pin, and we're moving on to the next match. Next up is the Beast from the East, Bam Bigelow from Asbury Park, New Jersey. One of the more unique characters, and interestingly enough, appearing in the first WWF game on the NES, but didn't appear in the second or third. He left WWE during that time, and then ended up coming back in the mid-90s for this run that led up to at least 1995. Bigelow, of course, biggest thing during his WWF tenure was his matchup against LT, Lawrence Taylor, the former New York Giant Hall of Fame football player, and getting a better match out of LT than probably should have happened. Bigelow would go on to ECW and have a run in WCW near the end, both being parts of groups, being in the Jersey Triad in WCW, and being part of the Triple Threat in ECW. He had some wonderful matches during that ECW run. Unfortunately, Bigelow doesn't have a moonsault or any kind of headbutt that he's able to do if you're playing as him. Finish him off with another slam and go for the pin. Next up is the one and only The Undertaker. The fact that The Undertaker is still working WWE matches to this day is just incredible to have that kind of run. Though honestly, every match he does at this point on should be more like the cinematic style he did with the Boneyard match, because the in-ring stuff may not necessarily be as good as it once was by any means. Taker, though, of course, how many legendary feuds over the course of the years, so many great matchups. One of my favorite eras for The Undertaker was the Ministry of Darkness. I was big into that. I thought it kind of got stupid as it went on, as pretty much was expected with anything WWF at that point, I guess, but still, I thought it was just really cool, and I thought it was like the coolest incarnation of The Undertaker, at least the most sinister looking version, obviously. Next up is Mr. Perfect. Some of the best vignettes of all time, with him throwing a football to himself and getting a long basketball shot. Mr. Perfect in ring was one of the best all time. Another one of those workers that could have a great match with pretty much anyone. He's also given me quite a bit of trouble here as we begin this matchup, but finally, I'm able to get a slam off. Once you can get one slam and go into some kicks usually, you can get the match to start turning in your favor. Here we're going to hit another dropkick just for the fun of it as Mr. Perfect ran away from me. I always have loved the Fisherman Suplex, aka the Perfect Plex. When that's done well, the bridge and all on that is just one of the smoothest looking moves. Hit the last slam needed on Mr. Perfect, and we're moving on to next match. Our next opponent is Razor Ramon. Now, we only get to face 9 opponents, so there's one opponent that we won't be wrestling against during this run. It's kind of random which ones you end up facing during your runs. Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, a personal favorite of mine, in my top 5 all time. Of course, the ladder match against Shawn Michaels being one of the best matches that he had the first one. The second ladder match at SummerSlam was decent enough as well, just not quite as good as the first time around. Razor Ramon's another one of those characters from WWF like Mr. Perfect that had some great vignettes, pretty much just imitating Scarface the whole time, but since Vince McMahon didn't know any better, he thought it was the greatest thing ever. Next up is the Hitman, Bret Hart. Like I mentioned in the Steel Cage Challenge, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and one of those wrestlers that could wrestle anyone and get a decent match out of. While I wasn't the biggest Bret Hart fan, I did like the Hart Foundation when that was a group. It helped that I already liked Owen Hart and British Bulldog a whole lot. So that group and subsequent storyline against the American team with Austin, the Patriot, and the like was very entertaining and one of the times I rooted for Bret Hart. Though when he went to WCW, it was just kind of like, not the greatest time for sure. Though back in the day, I have to admit, I did get into WCW a bit more early on than the WWE. I started with WWE in 1995, and then when I discovered Nitro, that's when I started to switch over and started watching more WCW. It's one of those things I became obsessed with as a young fan and would then track down tapes of all these old events, old WrestleManias and pay-per-views, and learn the history of wrestling. And that was prior to really the internet existing or being able to have a lot of information on it. Hitting that last body slam on Bret Hart, 1, 2, and 3, and we're moving on to that next matchup. The final one. This one's going to be against Yokozuna. So that means Hulk Hogan is the only one we're not facing off with. We've faced Hulk Hogan in other games, so this works out well. Yokozuna had a heck of a run during that time when he became the world champion. Though the loss to Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 9, I think, is something that many still don't think was a great idea. At least Yoko did get his win back, though it was with a lot of shenanigans at the King of the Ring a few months later. It may not be the most exciting strategy, but once you find one that works in this game, you definitely stick with it, that is for sure. For the fun of it with Yokozuna, I'm going to go to the top rope and hit one of those elbow drops. You can see when I landed, it barely takes away any health from Yokozuna. He only had a smidge left, and he still has a smidge left. Those top rope moves are just not worth doing in the game. Once we get the pin, though, we have become the WWF champion. There we have our credit screen after the title screen, and then it goes back to the other title screen where you can press start and get back to the main menu and start things over again. The King of the Ring mode is similar, just shorter, so the championship mode is the longer of the battle, so that's why I went through that one. And with that, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.